The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Devin Grant. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Cabinet and Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities. I'm also the co-state lead for our Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program efforts here in Pennsylvania. Welcome to our July webinar on the use of assistive technology and how you can use that in conversations with employers. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of quick things, maybe kind of a little commercials for you. If you're having trouble connecting or with audio, make sure you're using the telephone rather than the computer speakers. For some reason, that usually works better, so that might be your first thing to try. And then if it's still not really working well, maybe just disconnect and reconnect again. Sometimes that always helps as well. The next thing is, if you have questions, we usually hold those to the end, but if Marcia gets to a good stopping spot and I see any questions, maybe I'll interrupt her partway through. So you should see a question box there on your dashboard, and go ahead and type any questions you have in there, and I'll relay them on to Marcia, our presenter. Also, following the presentation, it'll probably be the beginning of next week, I will send out the slides to everybody along with a certificate of attendance if that's something that you need. That'll be attached. And then also an evaluation survey. So please fill that out and send that back, just so we can kind of pass on to the federal office how everybody thinks our subject matter experts have done and how they liked our program. So we certainly appreciate that if you send those back. And again, I'll try and get those out probably the beginning of next week. There's also going to be a document Marcia's going to go over with us kind of at the end that we've put together, and it's kind of titled as a Pennsylvania document, so that has to go through our internal channels here at the Commonwealth. So we can't send that out until I get the okay from the communications department. But once I do, we'll get that all out to everybody too, so you'll be able to use that in your efforts. So with that, I'd like to introduce Marcia Threlkeld. She is our subject matter expert under the Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program. Marcia is a consultant trainer and presenter working in systems change and alignment, school to work, employment first development and implementation, person-centered career planning, employer engagement, and assistive environment and information technology. We've worked with Marcia in the past, and she's always great to work with. We really appreciate hearing her knowledge and expertise and things that she shares with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Marcia. Thanks.
Thank you, Devin, and thanks to the Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, and the Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program for making it possible for me to chat with you today. And thank you, Devin Grant and Kelly Arnold, who are your state leaders that I've been able to work with in this employer engagement effort. And then it's also been great to work with Devin over the last couple of years in Pennsylvania doing a few different things. I always enjoy that very much. But Devin and Kelly, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for editing and assistance on the document that we will be presenting at the end of our time together today. So the use of assistive technology in conversations with employers. So it's one thing for if you're an employment organization, it's one thing to gear up and learn about assistive technology and start interfacing with your job seekers, and then it's another to have those conversations with employers about how the job seekers are conceivably using those to the advantage of the employer and themselves in the workplace. So that's what we specifically wanted to cover today. So just our outline, we will pretty quickly talk about what is assistive technology and what is universal design. What's that mean for employment? We'll quickly talk about the difference that it can make for users of technology, workplaces, and employers, and why we should learn about them. The meat of what we'll be discussing today will be some examples of assistive technology and universal design usage in workplaces. And then how do we have those conversations with businesses about assistive technology and universal design? And then we've already had some questions that have come in about how are assessment equipment and universal design paid for. So we worked that into what we'll be discussing today, and then we'll take a look at that document. So what is assistive technology, especially as we're talking about it in relationship to employment supports? Well, it's any support that will allow that employee to be able to be at their best. So to be more productive, more communicative, and included in the workplace. So it should be something that helps someone improve their abilities, maintain their abilities, or increase their abilities to do that specific job. So just a couple of examples would be voice-generating apps in a smart device, such as a phone or a tablet. Probably Prolo Coda Go is the one we've most heard about. Also Talk Tablet, and there's other more simple versions of communication or voice-generating apps that people are using these days. Apps that assist people with executive functioning. This is providing a lot of assistance to people who over the course of their day, when they understand this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing now, these are tips on how to do that best, or a video clip that shows me how to do it. And then this is how I transition to the next thing and that next thing that I need to be doing. A simple example is noise-reducing headphones to assist with sensory issues or just other things. Sometimes that's something that just helps people to concentrate more and be able to get through their work day. So all examples of assistive technology and employment supports. So what is universal design? It's making stuff and places that are going to fit for everyone. So when we're talking about the workplace, it might be a business that the public is coming into, or there's customers coming into, or it might be someplace where it's just the staff that are there. But it's making everything in that environment work for everyone, not just people who think of as experiencing disability. So it's buildings, it's products, it's environments, and how those might be changed or updated to include everyone. So we want a large and diverse range of workers and customers to be able to access the place of employment. So as we're having those discussions with employers, we're talking about how this is going to benefit the customers as well as their potential employees. So it's adapting that environment sometimes to assist the person to be there and be able to be at their best. Just a couple of examples is changing over doorknobs that are designed so that all kinds of hands can open them. The old-fashioned doorknob that you turned is not really very functional for a lot of people. Using push pads to open doors and those sorts of things that make it more accessible for all kinds of people. Also, signage that's in the workplace and making that available so people who experience disabilities might be able to understand that signage better. People who are non-readers, people who don't speak English or read English, that sort of thing, or using Braille on signs as well, would all be examples of universal design. I say that universal design is a mind shift in the way we think and we operate all the time. And a great way to start is in looking at your own place of employment and where it is that you work or places that you frequent, and looking at how is this accessible to everyone and how is it not, and how might we change those things. Also, practices at your own place of employment around interviewing techniques. Sitting across the table and facing each other is a type of an interview, and spoken in English that doesn't necessarily work for lots of people. And so how can we make that work for more people? So why do we want to consider this assistive technology and having these discussions? Well, I can tell you it's because it's becoming woven into the fabric of what it is we do and how it is we stay afloat everywhere. If we look at our policies, they are all starting to speak to assistive technology being available through all aspects of a person's life. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act speaks to assistive technology and being able to leverage that for everyone who's seeking employment, and working across agencies with other entities that have government funding to figure that out. Employment first policies are starting to speak to leveraging the use of technology or whatever it takes for people to be at their best. But then lastly, we want to consider assistive technology and start to have these conversations that perhaps we've never had before, because assistive technology is what people want and it's what people need, and it helps them to be at their best, to be as integrated as possible, to be as communicative as possible, to be as organized as they can be, and to be themselves with ease and with respect. And so we are not considering all that we should for people if we're not having these conversations and gearing up with assistive technology. So WIOA speaks to coordinated efforts between OVR and the Assistive Act programs across the country. Each state has one, and yours is the Pennsylvania Initiative on Assistive Technology, or the PIAT, and the Mid-Atlantic AT Center. So if there's a coordinated effort, and our employment services are working with that coordinated effort to figure it out for our job seekers, or perhaps it's people who are already employed and they've had issues come up at work, which assistive technology could help solve. So when you are working with your OVR counselors, if someone is signed up, I'm hoping that you're talking with them about the technology that people need to be successful. And we want to talk to them about payment and who might be doing assessments. So when you're opening that case, if you know someone is a user of assistive technology and they need that on the job, bring that up with the OVR counselor. If you know someone needs technology and they don't have exactly what's right for them, bring it up with the OVR counselor. Now, the OVR counselor might be working closely with the PIAT Center, the Pennsylvania Initiative on Assistive Technology, or you, the employment specialist, might be interfacing with that PIAT Center as well. So that's the entity that's going to have loaner devices and demos available for you, and do assessments as well. But speak with OVR about who would be the best person to do that assessment. And assessments for assistive technology can be done in a variety of ways. And I say let's not think about more of a medical model where someone makes an appointment. They go into an office where they've never been before, perhaps. They sit down with someone they have never met before, and they're trying equipment which they have never seen before. Very few people are going to be able to do their best under those circumstances. So oftentimes, assessments are done, I like to see them done more in a person-centered fashion, or in a discovery sort of way. So we're going out, we're seeing what people are using, we're looking at the actual environment that they are using their devices in, or they want to use their devices in, and then putting together or assessing what's going to work best for them. As we look across the country, the Coleman Institute, if you have never gone to their website, if you've never gone to their conference, which happens annually in Colorado, they have a piece of information out that they want everyone to sign on to. It's the rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology and information access, or also to the internet, that I think is very exciting and taking hold across our country. Iowa has the legal rights of people with disability that speaks specifically to assistive technology, and that's the kind of intertwining into what's already going on that we're seeing assistive technology intertwine into. Ohio just became the first state in our country to designate themselves as a technology-first state. So they have an executive order around this specifically, and I have the website there for you as well. So they are saying when someone has an employment services plan, that assistive technology will be looked at. Someone has a perhaps residential or living support plan, assistive technology will be addressed. When someone is transitioning from school, assistive technology will be addressed, and it will be a part of what's discussed and figured out for everyone with services. That's exciting. So what difference does assistive technology make to users, workplaces, or employers? So what about assistive technology and the business? Well, certainly businesses want their employees to work as independently and correctly as possible, and assistive technology can help with that. And employees with their devices are having a lot more clarification on what it is that they need to do, and therefore they're going to be able to work more independently. They're going to have fewer questions. Also, for a number of people these days who experience anxiety, assistive technology is helping them to be at their best and get through their work day. Another thing that's great to let businesses know is that there are consultants and experts in the community that can help figure this out for the person, so it's not up to the business to figure out devices or how they will be used, and that this is of no cost to the business. So what about universal design, and what does that mean for business? Well, it's a way to diversify who's going to come through the front door, be they an employee or be they a customer, so that places and equipment will function for everyone, and so that workplaces can accommodate all sorts of people. It's really an upgrade to ease and usability for everyone. If we look at our handheld technology, which most of us have in our pocket or with us most of the time, and often you look at the screen on the front, and instead of having a lot of words that perhaps someone who cannot read or does not read English sees on the screen, we have those icons that tell us, and I know immediately that that's my maps as I open it. And that makes it accessible to all sorts of users of that piece of equipment, and is an excellent example of universal design. Now, if we start to look at some examples of people using technology in the workplace, and these are all true stories that I know of and have been involved in one way or the other. And I've changed the names, but these are work situation and technology. The other thing is, most of the time, it's not a huge deal. Pieces of equipment themselves are no longer huge pieces of equipment necessarily. And the changes that need to be done as things are becoming more and more available and prices have gone down. So just realize when you're having these conversations with employers, you're still first and foremost talking with them about having the best employee and what that employee can do. And you don't have to mention how that employee can be at their best and how they can use technology. But your conversation is not in an overwhelming way about the technology. It's still about getting them the best candidates. So let's look at this example. Keisha and simple changes in the environment. So Keisha was someone for whom it was difficult to reach things that were down low or pick things up off of the floor, as I recall. I think she also had difficulty reaching up high. And so her job coach worked with the employer to have items that were raised up and on shelves that were down low. Now, obviously, everyone could use those same shelves. They also used some hooks. Sometimes hooks are really easy ways to find things and access things. Now, these, in this situation, were installed at the employer's expense because they realized that it actually was going to assist more than just Keisha. If they had employees who were aging and perhaps as time went by could not reach down, people who were temporarily injured, but employees who were pregnant, who were to have difficulty doing that, it's going to help a spectrum of people by making those changes. So in this situation, the employer did the costs and the job coach was part of the consultant on that. Now, if your employer was unable to assist with something like this, with shelves and hooks, then I would speak with the OVR counselor about what the person needed. As specific as you can be with that OVR counselor about shelves at what height and how many hooks, etc., so forth, and exactly how it's going to be of assistance will help your conversation. When you're speaking with OVR, and let's say it's not about shelves, but it's about another piece of equipment, you don't want to go into OVR and say, I don't know, I just think technology might be of assistance for this person. I mean, they're still going to talk to you and you might get some traction on that. But what they really need in order to set the okay to, for instance, pay for equipment is they need to know exactly how that piece of equipment is going to help the person to be more included, more communicative, and more productive at work. Jamelia in the use of an iPod on the floor of a drugstore. So she's someone who worked out on the floor in the drugstore, did a lot of facing of product and that sort of thing. But she's someone who does not use words. And the worry was what happened when customers came up and asked her for assistance. And they didn't want customers to think that they were being ignored or something. So she was someone who had the ability to use an iPod, and they used that. They put it in an armband on her arm, so she still had two hands free to work. I think sometimes people go too quickly to something as large as a tablet when something much smaller will work better for people. And then they had two hands free to work. And there was a simple app in there that when someone asked Jamelia for assistance, she could say, I'll go get someone to help you with that right away, and we'll be back and help you. One issue that comes up, and so it should. I understand why it does. It's places of employment that have it as a policy for all of their employees that they not use their devices, and most specifically that they not be going to the internet and searching for things and that why they are at work. And we understand that because they need to be concentrating on what it is they're doing. But then it becomes a reasonable accommodation discussion with the employer, and certainly I don't necessarily use those words, reasonable accommodation. But for instance, if the main concern is going to the internet or receiving phone calls or texting or things like that, there are ways to turn off those sorts of features, if it's appropriate, in devices. You can certainly put things in airplane mode and still be able to use communication apps and that kind of thing. With Apple devices, you can use what's called restrictions to turn off certain features. Or there's something called guided access, which makes it possible to use one specific app, but nothing else in the device. So there's ways that in discussion with the employer, we can figure out how this is going to work the best for them and they're going to be the most comfortable with it. Frank and the use of a smartphone at the movie theater. So Frank was someone who rode the bus back and forth to work, but his team was very worried about that. They really wanted a way to be able to check in with him before he left as he was along his route to work, and to have him check in when he got to work and when he was leaving work at the end of his shift. He also was able to check the bus schedules. We have a wonderful app. I live in Washington State. I'm able to work all over the country, but of course, a lot of my work over the last few years has been here in Washington State. And there's a great app that will show you not only what buses are closest to you, but what time they will arrive, and also if any of them are late, and that sort of thing. And his team were able to access that information and know that schedule as well. But as time went by, he also used his device. He was someone he did speak some. He definitely experienced some anxiety at work, but he had in his device what movies were in what theaters. And he could look that up when he was asked that by customers if he forgot or if he was feeling anxious. But just having it in his device helped him to be less anxious, and we saw his hours were increased to full time because his work started to become more relaxed, and his interfacing with customers got a lot more relaxed. Dan and the use of a tablet in office job, and we're seeing the use of apps, and doesn't necessarily have to be a tablet. Again, it could be a smaller device related to executive functioning. So he did a lot of administrative assistant sorts of things, a lot of collating and copying and that sort of thing, and people in the office were coming up and needing things quickly perhaps, and asking him to do things. And that ability to handle that was very difficult for them. So they decided certain apps and certain features that they were going to use, that Dan would always have his device with him, not just the computer when he was sitting at his desk, but when he was in the office supply room, etc., so forth, at work. And he would get his, in essence, orders from people who needed things in the office through his device. And that could be ordered. He could let people know what he had to do in front of them, in essence, when they could expect to get the job back from him. So he was using a calendar feature, an email, and an executive functioning app. Ahmet and the use of headphones for his job in the sports center. So he had a job which he liked very much. He liked his coworkers very much. But sometimes it could get very noisy in the sports center, and this was very difficult for him. So he just used a set of headphones to reduce the noise in the environment, and therefore that reduced his anxiety and made things work more seamlessly for him. So it was just a conversation with the employer about using noise reducing, not noise canceling headphones, so he could still hear and converse, etc., so forth. But while he was at work, and that was a simple adaptation to ask for, and by the by, if you're working with job seekers or people who already have their job and you're seeing some kind of unease in the workplace, one of the things to look at is that sound level and see if there's ways to adjust and accommodate for that. Noise reduction headphones, yes, most commonly I see people use the kind that might have the large band across the top of your head and be on your ears, but boy, there's just smaller and more invisible ways for that to happen as well. So I just put in a nice set of ones through the Vibes company that's out there right now that is just small and in people's ears, and again, noise reduction so they can still hear. And there's very low-tech versions of this that can be used as well. Chin and the use of communication and task sequencing systems at his job at Microsoft. So when I met him, he's someone who can hear and understand everything famously, is a man of very few words and doesn't speak very much at all. His job at Microsoft is working on a grounds maintenance crew. Now, this is not a crew of all people who experience disabilities. This is a crew of, he is the only person on the crew who experiences disability. Now, the supervisors were using phones to communicate back and forth because the grounds at Microsoft are very large. So the person was, the people and the crew are spread out doing different things. They're not working all together in one location. And the supervisors were calling back and forth, but not necessarily with using their phones with people who were not supervisors. We see this quite often, that technology, information technology, might be used by some positions within a company, but not necessarily what we might think of as more entry-level positions, which is perhaps where our job seekers might be going, maybe so, maybe not. So with Chin, it was saying, well, can you use your devices and contact him? He is someone who needed fairly regular reminders to check the quality of his work. And he had an employment specialist who was there beyond when they thought they really needed to be there with him a lot, just asking him about the quality of his work and a couple of other things. So we just changed that and asked the supervisors if they could use their phones and if they could have his phone with him and if they could call and ask him to check the quality of his work. He also had a social story in his device that he watched before he went to work, as I think when he watched it. He had to work in the parking lot areas. The parking lots there are very busy. And it was safety issues. So it was reminding him what areas to walk in the parking lot and not to walk in and how to be safe there. So he could watch that social story. It's very easy to do those with videos and have them in our devices these days. Now in this situation, Chin had his own smartphone. It was just talking with the employer about his using it as part of his job, which they hadn't thought of as typical for that specific position. Ralph entered smartphone to Skype with his job coach, and this story is how someone who is supported through Community Integrated Services, a good organization in the state of Pennsylvania, and has integrated the use of technology with their job seekers and people already in positions, and have some really talented employment specialists who are using assistive technology with people. And so this story comes through them. and with someone who had had a position for quite some time in a law firm. The time had gone by, and one of the things they were to do there was distribute the mail. And there were always some pieces of mail that they had trouble figuring out where it was they were going to go to. But having the job coach there to help with that every day was also not the perfect scenario. I will say in my mind, when someone can be supported through assistive technology, rather than having a live person standing there in the environment, it is more respectful to use that piece of technology and more normalizing. So the solution that employment specialist got up and then had the discussion with the person, did some trial and error with the person, and then approached the employer, was to use a smartphone and have that in a suction holder on the desk. Then when they got to those pieces of mail that they were problematic and they had put those aside in a pile, and then they did Skype or FaceTime with their job coach. They held up the piece of mail that they didn't know what to do with in front of the smart device so that through Skype or FaceTime, the employment specialist on the other end could see the piece of mail and then tell them how to handle it, and they didn't need to come to the place of employment. So therefore, all the mail could get distributed, which I thought is just a great solution. There's a number of ways that the likes of Skype and FaceTime are being used these days, but I thought this was just a great story. I have a picture here that on the screen you'll see the small phone and the suction device on the desk, and you can see the employment specialist's image up in the phone. And the person who works there is holding a piece of mail up in front so the employment specialist can see it. Now, they shared with me that in discussing this with the law firm where the person worked, that it was important to them that the device be set so that whoever, the clients, the customers, if you like, who were coming into the law firm could not be seen. So they were very specific as the angle that they set that up in. They also told me that in order to make it easy for the person to FaceTime with them, that they moved other icons off of the home screen to make it easier. They enlarged the text, and I believe also the employment specialist was the only person who was in the contact list, again, just to make it easy for the supported employee to be able to use this method and get that coaching remotely from his employment specialist. I thought it was just a great example. So negotiating for the use of assistive technology, how are we going to have these conversations with employers?
Marcia, this is Devin. Can I interject a couple of questions here after those really good stories? I think it's a good time for at least one of these questions. I think some of the questions that I've got you will be answering, so I'm not going to ask all of the questions that I've received. But the one particular question, they were asking about the app that was used for the worker with the armband and that was playing the greeting to the customers. I think some of the other, you'd mentioned some other apps maybe as well that weren't named by name. So maybe if you could just give a couple different samples of products, apps that are out there that are helpful, that might be good at this point.
Yes, thank you. In the armband, in that for, I think they, as I recall, they used a very simple communication app called Yes, No. You can put just a few things in. It's very easy to touch and figure out what it is you want to say. If you want to have speech that's recorded in a device for someone to use, don't go immediately to large and robust apps such as ProLoco to Go and Talk Tablet wonderful, large and robust communication systems. But they're large and robust. If a person wants and needs that, that's what they need. But if you just want access to a few things for the person to say, and if using a much simpler app is the way to go, there's a number of communication apps that are out there that are just easier, and yes, no, with what this person had used. The other thing that I've seen people do is on the notes page in their device, that's if you're on Apple, they had a few phrases which they typically needed to say at work. And then they learned how to use what's called speak selection in Apple devices, where you touch on it, you drag on it, and then it will say speak. You touch speak and it will just say it. Now that's something that's built into the device. It doesn't even require an app. But I say look at simple solutions before you look at the big complicated ones. Now some apps around executive functioning. My favorites are Visual Planner, and this is a fairly robust executive functioning app where you can pull in video clips, notes pages. You can look at what it is you're supposed to do over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the course of a month. You can have alarms that are built in and all sorts of things, but it's working well for a number of people, and that's Visual Planner. I very much like first then Visual Scheduler HD. Not as complex as Visual Planner. You're able to pull in photos, video clips if you want, or not if you don't. Put things in order for the person. You can also have timers associated for those. And then you can have choices of things that they might do on break. And another one that is similar to First Then Visual Scheduler HD that I like equally as well is called ChoiceWorks. Also, so easy to use in ChoiceWorks, and you can set up First Then Visual Scheduler HD to be this way as well. Many people have used the picture exchange system. They may have learned that at school or from a speech-language pathologist, and that is where, you may have seen in the past, there'll be laminated pictures Velcroed on a long list, and that's the person's to-do list. And when they have finished the picture, whatever's on the first picture, they peel it off of the Velcro and they move it over to a different strip, which is their all done strip. Well, ChoiceWorks is set up very similarly to that. And so oftentimes if people have learned that tactile system involving Velcro and laminated photos, they take really easily to ChoiceWorks. So I can go on and on about apps, but Visual Planner, First Then Video Scheduler HD, and ChoiceWorks are my favorite kind of executive functioning sorts of apps.
Okay, thanks. And then real quick, someone mentioned that they've had good success with Alpine earplugs, so that's just a different brand than the one you mentioned. Like Alpine, like the mountains in Europe.
Right.
And then someone asked about setting voice alarms in smartphones, but I think that's probably phone specific more than a general answer, isn't it? Or is that something you can answer in 30 seconds?
Yes, I think I can. Most phones you can set alarms, but they're not voice alarms, okay? And so the way we do it, so you can set, and you can maybe even choose what kind of sound you want. There's an app, Ada Reminders is one of the things you may have to, sometimes they call it something different, but Ada, A-I-D-A, is an app that allows you to set you can voice record. So when the app goes off, it'll be a voice that's telling you what to do. I believe that's what, for instance, the person in the law firm with community integrated services and that employment specialist use. The other thing that we are setting up now for people to get voice alarms that tell them to do things is using Echo Dots and Alexas and things like that. So that's my short answer. So how is assistive technology part of negotiating employment? We want to make it as natural as possible, and as it is becoming part of people's lives and how they negotiate the world. If, let's say, the employment specialist has really addressed assistive technology during the discovery process, if they've really looked at what equipment does the person currently own, what are they using, how are they using it, or is there any equipment that they used in the past to their benefit? That should be part of the discovery phase, and you might want to sit with the person and watch them use their piece of equipment or let them try a few things on your piece of equipment. This is what we need to be doing now. Also, as part of the pre-ETS or the pre-employment transition services under WIOA, that OBR will be okaying for people. During that process, we can also look at what assistive technology is working for someone, what are they able to do with it, and again, this is just some trial and error that you might be doing as part of that pre-ETS service. So I just want to check to see if, for instance, I work with people sometimes who have never used a touchscreen device, and I want time to just sit and see if they can understand touchscreen technology or learn to, and may be able to do a few simple things. This would be a lot of information then that I could go forward and share with the OVR counselor about what I had done during the discovery phase or the pre-ETS phase. You might want to look at getting a loaner piece of equipment specifically around that person and their scenario through the PAT Center. And if you've done that, you're going to have a lot more information. So this is the things you're going to do to get ready to negotiate with that employer. You're not going to talk with them about what you did in the discovery phase or pre-ETS or the loaner piece of equipment. But this is all the background that you have done before you get to that negotiation phase. So perhaps you've tried a piece of equipment that the person got on loan from PAT Center, and having discussions with your PAT Center. In my state, our assistive, our ACT program, they have different names, the agencies in the different states. They say that OVR has assistive technology coordinators in our state. And our ACT program says their best customer is that OVR specialist for the state of Washington who comes in there specifically around exacting job seeker situations to figure out the best pieces of equipment for people. But as an employment specialist, you can work with people and go in and have those discussions as well. So if you've discussed these sorts of activities and what it is you've been doing with the OVR counselor, and maybe you've involved the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center around that and talking about assistive technology as well. So you've done all your homework and you have all of this behind you. So you're preparing then to negotiate the position. And by that point, you really know the person. You know how it is they use equipment or really could use equipment to their advantage if they got that position. You really know the place of employment. You've studied that business and you should feel ready to negotiate. You want to go in with some suggestions as well, but you also want to be open and ask the employer for their input. You want to be clear about how the person will use the equipment at work and how it will be of assistance to them and how it's going to be an advantage or work for the business as well, how it's going to be to their advantage as well, making this as natural as possible. And again, you're not talking with them about the piece of equipment. You're talking to them about this job candidate, being the best job candidate, and yes, they're going to use this piece of equipment in this way. I have a couple of examples for you that might be part of those conversations with employers. So here's one. Example number one. We have studied your business. We know what you're about. We understand what you need here. And we know that customer satisfaction is very important to you. And we know our job candidate, Michael. And we've seen him using his iPod in various work experiences. And we understand that very well, too. We know the iPod can make it possible for Michael to let customers know that they've been heard and tell them that assistance is coming. So it's letting them know, I know you, the business, and I know the job seeker, and I can see how this would be possible. Here's example number two. We know that working as independently as possible and people being at their best is very important to you here. And we have seen how Juan succeeds in organizing his day by using his tablet. So therefore, he needs as little assistance as possible to be a great employee. So our vision is that the job coach will be assisting Juan to set up his tablet with this app, and they'll make sure that everything is working seamlessly. And this will assist Juan to have fewer questions and have a clear understanding of his job. So some other things besides how do I have these conversations and how do I frame them? Sometimes if the employer doesn't really know what that looks like, can't really see exactly how that might seamlessly fit into their workplace. And that's to ask for a working interview where the person is using their piece of technology. And of course, you would want to decide with the employer exactly what the tasks would be that the person would be learning. The job coach would want to see and look at those tasks ahead of time and then help your job seeker to set up the app appropriately so they could use it in a working interview in a way that functioned both for the employer and for the person looking for a job. Another way that works very well is using video or picture career portfolios, and I love video career portfolios, where they show the job seeker successfully using their technology. Now take note here, the video career portfolio should not be about the piece of technology. What's shown in that video career portfolio is the person working and doing a great job, and yes, they happen to be using a piece of technology that just melds right in. But it's not about the piece of technology like this is the centerpiece of what it's all about. And what both of these things can do is demystify what it would look like or be like for the person to use their technology, both through a working interview or through a video career portfolio. Now, quite often, we're actually negotiating or bringing in a piece of assistive technology later after someone has worked there for a while. So the first scenario is when you're negotiating with an employer when a person is just about to get a job. If you're bringing it in later, it's similar in that you want to come up with the solution. You want to know that the person can master and use that solution and then take that idea to the employer so that the issue is solved. But you want to ask them for their input and their ideas as well. And a great example of that was from the story earlier that Community Integrated Services had done, where the person was working in the law firm. But glitches were coming up. He was starting to have difficulty in his job. So they came up with a solution. They tried it with the person ahead of time, and as I understand that, the person had to learn to use that device and learn the function of FaceTime or Skype. And then they went to the employer and talked about using the solution, asked for their input, and used that and how they were going to set things up as well. When negotiating universal design changes, you want to know the business. You want to have those solutions that invite ideas too. So some examples in universal design might be changing the ways in which interviews happen, so they're more accessible to people, getting interview questions ahead of time, or not necessarily setting straight across from each other when they're having interviews. Sometimes that eye contact is difficult. So I've seen people change interviews where you're sitting side by side, or change interviews where you're actually walking through a workplace and moving while you're having the interview. Signage that can be more accessible, maybe using symbols or changing the actual physical presence, where staircases might be changed to ramps. And sometimes it's a longer range goal for a business to change, make universal design changes, and sometimes it's things that can be done very quickly. It's also that mindset change where stuff and places being accessible to everyone, employees and others alike. But we want to be a consultant to them. If you are an employment specialist, there might be information that you might need to go get, for instance, from the PIAT Center or from OVR or from the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, and bring that information back. But don't dodge the conversation. Make assistive technology part of the discovery process. Really know your job candidate and know the business too. Be ready to come up with solutions. I get calls a lot about, can't I just go in and say, the ADA is law and the person wants to use this device? I certainly wouldn't start my conversation there. Obviously, that's going to set the employer up and put them on the defense. Instead, we want to try to speak to how this piece of technology or adaptations in the environment will be to the advantage of the person, but also to the place of employment. How it can be easy to set up, how we can get assistance to set that up, how they can get consultancy on this, that it doesn't need to be a large change or an overwhelming process, and how it can be of benefit. Most often, assistive technology or changes to the environment are not expensive or not large things. Sometimes people already own the technology. OVR is such a wonderful partner in figuring this out, but again, you want to go to them with solutions. If you can bring in video clips to an OVR counselor of how someone is using technology, that's going to also demystify to OVR as to how the person is more included, productive, or organized at work. Paying for technology or paying for assessment. So OVR and bringing in documentation and speaking with them. So on a case-by-case basis, your OVR counselor can look at that with you. It has to be about work-related accommodations, work-related needs. So you want to discuss that at the OVR appointment. And I had a recent conversation with Robert Groendahl at the U.S. Administration on Community Living, who was also telling me if the person happens to experience blindness and visual service programs, if it has to do with independent living as well, they can oftentimes get the equipment for the person that way. So this might be a flow for you to look at on getting assistive technology assessments paid for. that you would speak with the OVR counselor. And this would be if you think a piece of equipment would be helpful, you don't know exactly what piece of equipment it might be. If they are someone who is signed up with intellectual developmental disability services and happen to be lucky enough to be on a waiver, Medicaid waivers can pay for pieces of equipment as well. And so you're going to be speaking with the case manager, or perhaps the person or their parent or someone else in their life is speaking with that case manager, but you're going to bring this up to them. If they are in pre-ET services, we want to speak with OVR about who is that provider of pre-ET services, and can some of this assessing be done as part of pre-ET. And I think if you don't know your the PET service and staff there well, and realize what they know is assistive technology. They know about devices. They're not necessarily experts in employment. That's what we want to bring to the table. But working closely with them, and perhaps having them work collaboratively with OVR would be the way to go for your customers. So under work-based learning experiences, we can look at assistive technology there in pre-ETS. And under counseling on opportunities for transition to post-secondary, we can look at assistive technology there in pre-ETS. And then under workplace readiness training and developing social skills and independent living and other kinds of work readiness skills, to just identify what people need for assistive technology and how that's going to be helpful, and have that written up. And I have a link for you there about a website around pre-ET services and technology, WIOA. Schools can certainly pay for assessments if the person is still in school and you're working with them. So that can be addressed in IEPs. Now, if the school is buying a piece of equipment, the school will be owning that piece of equipment, and it will not be leaving with the person. Most commonly then, OVR might come into place and purchase a piece of equipment for someone for whom it certainly made sense for. I was speaking with our Voc Rehab assistive technology expert in the state of Washington, and he was saying that OVR could even buy that exact piece of equipment that the person had used while they were in school, could buy it from the school. All the school has to do is come up with a price for it, and OVR could buy that specific piece of equipment. And I thought that would just be a great way to go. Also, discussing technology in benefits counseling. That happens before someone gets a job, and I like to have benefits counseling right after somebody gets a job too, because certainly something like, let's say, ERWI or employment-related work expenses could pay for monthly cell phone service, that sort of thing, or other pieces of equipment, but to bring it up in benefits counseling. Your waivers are being changed across our country so that they can pay for pieces of equipment and pay for assessment. As we know, waivers are different in every state, and there's usually several waivers within every state. And what's exactly yours in Pennsylvania, I'm not certain of, but there's going to be ways that equipment can be paid for. As waivers are being updated and they ask for stakeholder input and they have those community meetings, I think it's a great idea to go and talk about assistive technology for people. The Americans with Disabilities Act and civil rights to protect people certainly includes accommodations and transportation and telecommunications for individuals. This is a link to the Job Accommodation Network, or JANS network, has a searchable link on their SOAR that's about all kinds of technology, and looking it up, it's great on that SOAR site, but also just the equal right to accommodation in JAN, just some verbiage for you to have at your fingertips that's out there as well as a resource. Some information about what equal rights and accommodation under the ADA. So reasonable accommodation and something that is not an undue hardship to the employer. So for instance, if all their employees are getting computers, and your employees, should they get a job there, might need a touchscreen computer. That, I think, would be a reasonable accommodation and that sort of thing to ask for. Disability Rights Pennsylvania. A couple of different ways if you are really getting stuck with people having the right to use their technology, or if the Medicaid waiver has denied someone being able to get a piece of equipment, I would speak with Disability Rights Pennsylvania about the ADA. They had a wonderful self-advocacy guide to assistive technology use that's right on your Disability Rights Pennsylvania site, so take a look at that. But again, if someone is denied payment for technology through Medicaid, they can be spoken with as well. As assistance for you, we're in the process of creating this document that Devin spoke about at the beginning, and it's called Using Assistive Technology and Universal Design as a Resource for Business. Also, we envision it as a resource for employment specialists. So I'd like to bring that up now. And we put it together as a two-page document that we envision. It will be available for you to print out, and it would just be one page, obviously, printed on front and back. We've tried to use language that helps you, but also could be understood by people in all sorts of professions. So it simply goes through, it addresses what is assistive technology and what does that mean for business. Using assistive technology means your business can expand to be a more diverse range, to meet a more diverse range of employees and customers alike. It can leverage the talents of many types of workers and create a welcoming and inviting customer experience. What does assistive technology look like in the workplace with some examples? How's the cost of assistive technology covered? What's universal design? How is the cost of universal design covered? What does the ADA say? And some resources there for you. And if you are looking for more information yourself, I suggest really looking through some of these sites. And there's the PIAT Center, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, etc., so forth. There's the Job Accommodation Network. And suggest that we hope this document will be helpful and will be a starting point in your conversation with about people using assistive technology. It shouldn't be a big deal. We want to talk about how it's of advantage to people and not about the technology itself. I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to now ask Devin if we have any more questions.
We have a couple questions. They're both kind of related to how do we pay for it. And again, they may be a little more specific and Pennsylvania specific, but I think you could probably answer them in general. The first one is, what if they don't have an open OVR case or an OVR counselor? Can you open the OVR claim just for the assistive technology?
And the answer is yes. That's my understanding and what I've been told that you would go, because you know, when the person has a change at work, you can go in and open a VR case. So oftentimes looking at a piece of equipment has to do with an issue that's come about at work, right? And that we know assistive technology can be of assistance, or we think it can. So the answer is yes.
Okay. And then the next one is, does ODP and OVR in Pennsylvania allow Skype and FaceTime and bill for that coaching time? If so, would it be considered direct or indirect services? I don't know if you were able to find that out when you were working with CIS?
This is a great question, and it's coming up across the country. Every state that I've worked in, and this is right where we are with assistive technology. It's coming up in employment services, it's coming up in residential services, and it is a question for your state. And I am unsure, and I bet Community Integrated Services knows, but I'm not able to say specifically how it works in your state. So would it be considered direct support, et cetera, so forth? And it's a great question. We need to start bringing it up in meetings and get it addressed. Obviously, if you have less transportation time between the different employment sites to assist people over the course of a day, you can assist more people when we're using this sort of thing. And I think it's more respectful, and those are the conversations we need to be having. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific on that one, Devin.
Okay. Let me see. I just got a few more popped up quick. Let me. Let's see. Someone suggested contacting the individual special needs unit coordinator through their MA insurance. Someone else asked, could Skype training fall under the participant-directed goods and services waiver service for those with PFDS or community living waiver? And the person from CIS actually is answering here. He said most calls are less than 5 minutes, so he doesn't bill. Then he added directly in a later answer. Oh, I'm sorry. He kind of continued the answer. If they are over 15 minutes, I bill directly. So that's how he does that with the FaceTime. So hopefully that's helpful. And then, let's see, there's a question in between his answers. What are some of the most used devices and how are they used?
Most used devices, I would say, are, if we're talking about the device itself and not an app, I would say are your handheld devices. People are moving away from the larger tablets to the smaller devices that you can have in your pocket or whatever. That is the most common. I'm seeing lots of use of headphones in a variety of ways. Lots of issues around anxiety that are coming up, and people using whatever it is that might help them to be at their best. And sometimes these are objects even that they might use at break or things like that. So a lot of stuff around anxiety that's coming up. And of course, then we're starting to see a lot of use of things like Echo Dots and Alexas. We think of those just as being of use at home in a house, but it certainly doesn't have to be. It could be in a place of employment, and now especially because we can text and make calls with a voice, it's been a great boom for people who experience physical disabilities and have some limitations there, but have good use of their voice, is just bringing about some wonderful opportunities for people to get information, to access other people, and to control their environment, of course, in all kinds of ways using those devices as well. And we can operate things in the work environment using that too. So those are some things that are coming up a lot lately.
All right, thank you. I don't see any more questions right now. We've still got about another 15 minutes of time. So why don't I give a last couple remarks, and if we see more questions, we can jump back to those. I did want to take some time at the end to mention again, next week I will try to send out these slides from Marcia, and along with the certificate of attendance and the evaluation survey, if you would be kind enough to fill those out for us and send those back to me. I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, but we do record these webinars and post those. It takes a while to get them posted because we get them captioned first. So once they're captioned, we'll post those. And the link for that goes out in the different notices we send out for the different webinars. Also, I wanted to mention next month's webinars. We actually flip-flopped July and August for some scheduling reasons. But next month, on August 28th, we'll be talking more about how do you talk to businesses, how do you build those successful relationships where businesses get to the point where they're ready to hire one or more individuals. So there's some tips that Rick McAllister will be giving us on that. And let's see, I don't see any other questions. So Marcia, I don't know if you had any other closing remarks.
I would encourage people to look at some of those resources. I can take a moment to pull up some of those websites. So this is now on your screen, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, and you can see here's their employer's guide around employees. And a couple of things covered there are worksite accessibility and also equipment and services. So right there is a guide for employers from the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. And this is your PIAT Center, and how they will, if you go down, you can see they have device demonstrations. They also have device loans. And I was very much encouraging you to connect with them. This is just the information about WIOA. This is the Coleman Institute's The Rights of People with Cognitive Disabilities to Technology and Information Access that they've been wanting people to sign on to. Ensuring access to technology and information for the 28 million people with cognitive disabilities in the United States will create new markets and employment opportunities, decrease dependency on public services, reduce healthcare costs, and improve the independence, productivity, and quality of life of people with cognitive disabilities. They have other things on their website that I would suggest you take a look at as well. And this is that link to Iowa and assistive technology and the rights of people with disabilities. This is the signed executive order from Ohio that is the establishment of the Technology First Initiative that they have just put through, being the first in the nation to do so. So I was happy to be able to share that link with you. I'm very excited about that. I now done a little push in my state, and we're starting to look at it too, and we'll see what kind of traction we can get. But with that, Devin, I would be through.
Well, thank you very much. That was some really great information. Again, we'll get the slides out next week, and eventually we'll get the whole recording posted, so please stay tuned for that. And again, with that document, once we get it cleared through the communications office here in state government, we'll get that out as well. So that can be used as another resource for everybody. So with that, I guess we can sign off about 12 minutes early. Thanks, Marcia. And
Thank you, Devin. And thank you.